Hello and welcome back, and that's right, today I want to review this. This is the TS-264 from QNAP, and it forms the 2-bay of their 64 series of prosumer desktop devices. It's also a review that I have been about 9 months late on, to be straight. Right, in 2022, way back in spring, I think about April or May at a push, I was able, luckily, to be one of the first to review the 64 series in 4-bay and in 6-bay, along with a bunch of other devices. And when that series was launched, it was reported to arrive in 2, 4 and 6-bay. And then some time went by, and then more time went by, and then more time went by, and the 2-bay device in that family seemed to be taking forever, with everyone asking about it, despite maybe QNAP feeling like the 2-bay tier of NAS storage not being quite as popular as it used to be. I would argue, with the size of hard drives these days getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the appeal of much more compact NAS devices that can take advantage of these large-scale hard drives in a much more compact setting, but still have all of that extra capacity, has never been more popular than ever. And in the case of this 264, although stock slowly started bleeding into availability towards the end of 2022, it's only up to now that I can finally get my hands on one and start to review this 2-bay. But it's worth highlighting that things have changed in the world of NAS. In the, again, 8 or 9 months since this series was first kind of revealed officially by the brand. And a lot of those differences have reflected the hardware inside this, which in some cases will make you, when you're looking at the 2, the 4 and the 6-bay of this product family, you suddenly find out that the 2-bay, at least at the time of recording, has certain hardware advantages, one might say, that are not available on the larger scale devices, and we'll be delving into that throughout this video. But what we're going to do in today's video is we're going to talk about the hardware, we're going to talk about the software, talk about the inside and the outside, and ultimately I'm going to help you decide 2 things. One, if this is a great little 2-bay for your needs, and periodically throughout this video we're going to be comparing it against this on and off. This is the Synology DS723. The DS723, released at least at the time of me making this video about a week ago, is their big rival Synology's 2-bay, which again, arriving with theoretically similar hardware, but the system has gone in a very different direction. Ultimately, that device and this device, if you're looking at a prosumer 2-bay in 2023, it really is just those 2 devices. Everything else in the market gives you some of what these are offering, but by no means all. So I am looking forward to doing a more dedicated comparison between these 2 NASs, but I'm definitely going to be factoring that into this video review of this 2-bay. So let's talk about what we get for our bunch. Straight away, there is the retail box. It's pretty much what you expect. It's kind of the same sort of retail packaging QNAP always use. Brown box design there, big old label on the front giving you real-time information about it, about what's inside real-time. It's not an LCD panel. I will highlight the price tag for this device, again for a 2-bay. Because it's prosumer and because of the hardware we're going to talk about, it is not the cheapest. In the US, you're looking at about $480 to getting closer to $500. In the UK, it is about 470, 480 NICA. And again, when it comes to in Europe, you're looking at about 480, 500 there. With the UK there, I'd say closer to about 450 from the prices I've seen online, but again that's because I can see the tax, I can see the availability. Different regions, different retailers, different tax codes, things are going to differ for you there. So that's quite a lot for a 2-bay there. So you're going to be very intrigued about what kind of hardware you're going to get for your bunts, because I think it would be fair to say when it comes to buying a QNAP NAS, unlike a Synology NAS, the hardware takes up 60% of the cost and the software 40%, and Synology very much the other direction. So let's have a look inside. The first thing I already know, because I've looked inside at least the top of this box, the retail packaging here is dense. They have made sure to give this some premium protection in transit, which I will always give a couple of extra bonus points for. It's very minor, but given the danger towards silent damage that can happen to the transistors of the controller boards, even when this device isn't populated at shipping, I will give an extra couple of points to any NAS that is particularly well packed when we see so many NASs arriving in flimsy cardboard. But this is our accessory kit. Inside we have details on our 3-year included warranty, which can be upgraded to 5 years as an optional extra, and information on our first time setup. We've also got screws for 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch media, although 3.5-inch drives, SATA, can be click and loaded in, but you will need those screws for 2.5-inch drives. There's also Cat 5e cable, single one there. Again, I believe it's a 1 meter cable. Cat 5e is fine for this network here. I'm not going to give them too much criticism over cable there not being a Cat 6, Cat 7, because this doesn't have the kind of Ethernet by default that could take advantage. And our external 65 watt PSU there on the back there, so thereby removing it from the inside, bringing any kind of heat problem there. And we've got a UK mains lead buried just there. So let's remove the device. Again, huge amount of protection there in transit. Again, I know there'll be a lot of people saying, obviously factoring environmental costs and stuff like this, and that is a true factor there. But I think the minute you're looking at a device that's going to be on 24/7 anyway, you're going to have to take the rough with the smooth anyway. And the fact that you want this device to survive transit, I would rather they do it this way. Now, we remove the external packaging there. Have a little look at the device. Remove it from the bag. And again, we're very familiar with this hardware design. We've already seen it in the 4 and the 6 bay here on the channel. And that TS-264 is featured in, I'd say, at least 12, maybe 15 videos here on the channel. So I'm very familiar with the hardware of this product family. And again, there have just been a couple of little changes to this one that have happened due to changes in production technique and available resources, which will reflect on this. Because let's talk about those changes before anything, because I think rather than, and we will cover this more in later sections, but you may have noticed with that price tag being a little higher for a 2 bay, what exactly are you getting that's any different? Well, when you look at the rest of the family, the product family between all these different devices, some of you may be aware that there have been shortages in memory components globally, and you're going to see the price of memory modules, particularly down to the cells that are actually put onto those modules and the PCBs, rising in price. And a lot of NAS devices that have arrived with 2 or 4 gig, we're starting to see a lot of NAS brands start to immediately bump them up by default to 8 gig on day one. The reason for that is because if you've got shortages of memory, it becomes more cost efficient to provide 8 gigabyte modules where there's 2 gig per cell on a single side than it is to go down the road of producing 2 and 4 gig. And that's the case with this, because the 264 is arriving with 8 gig of memory by default. And again, more on that later on, but that's one of the reasons why this is priced. So one of the other reasons this has seen change from its predecessors is the HDMI output on this device being HDMI 2.1. They've upgraded the HDMI on this, and whereas the 4 and the 6 bay currently have HDMI 2.0, this has a much better version of HDMI on the rear, but we'll talk about more in the ports section later on. But for now, we've looked at the accessories. It's all fairly standard stuff. I will add, much like I've had in other videos, I'm kind of annoyed about the lack of M2 NVMe heatsinks being included here, because I think if you're going to use a device like this that has the M2 NVMe's inside the slots for you to take advantage of, those SSDs can get rather hot. And given the compact nature of this and the sheer amount of hardware that's been crammed inside this, that you'll see properly when we do the strip down of the casing there, I think they should have included those little M2 heatsinks, whether it is full 2280 length ones, that again, retail $8 to $10, at manufacture you're talking peanuts, or at the very least the little adhesive ones that they do provide inside the more premium desktop NAS devices like the H474 and the 73A series. All of these other 4 bays that arrive with those heatsinks on board, it costs very little extra to include them. Why are they absent here? But that's enough about the unboxing. What we want to do is take a closer look at the chassis and get a good grip on the design of the TS-264. Now, QNAP have been providing this chassis for quite a long time now in its myriad of forms. First premiered in 2018 in their B and BE series. We've seen each iteration of the flagship Prosumer series adopt the same chassis with small modifications and a change in colour palette. In the case of this, we've got the gold and black design there. It's very sleek looking. I'm a big fan of this chassis colour scheme. I've always liked the rose gold copper on the side, and I do like it in this revision as well. Now, again, no immediately accessible trays there on the front. You have to unlock the device using the locking mechanism on the side, and then this panel removes off the side there. And again, there are our two trays. We don't have an LCD panel here to give us that information about IPs and stuff, which is a bit of a bummer, in my opinion. I actually quite liked that previous iterations of this product series in the last two generations over the last 5 years had LCD panels for real information about it, so it's a shame that it's absent here, but it's not a deal breaker really. Now, again, as mentioned, the trays inside are click and load, so you've got screw holes there for 2.5-inch drives, but again, a standard class hard drive clicks in very easily directly inside there. You take your drive, you slot it in, goes inside the bay. Don't worry about this drive, this is just a dummy one. You put the clicks in, and there you go. You slide that drive straight in. It's that straightforward. And again, you can run this system on a single drive if you choose, or you can go ahead and put two in and take advantage of RAID, like RAID 1 or RAID 0, or again, add one and then add another drive gradually as you go along. Again, both, if you have a little look when you remove both the trays, you can see right there down the barrel at the back, if I get the lighting just right, the two SATA connectors there. Now I will add, with those SATA connectors, there's no loose wiring there, they're combined data and power connectors, and it is a very clean setup there down the end. Again, directly onto the fan there on the rear of the system. Now, if you look carefully on the inside, you will see part of that change that I detailed earlier. Now, I'm going to have to bring that quite close, and hopefully there'll be images in the review below, and when we take apart the chassis you'll get a better understanding of it. But inside, not only have we got those two M2 NVMe slots that we discussed, but the SODIMM modules there on the inside, they can't be upgraded. So inside, if I put it at that angle, you may be able to see 4 chips in a row there. Those 4 chips that are in a row are 2 gig DDR4 memory modules. So the fact this arrives with 8 gig by default, yum yum, but you can't upgrade further than that. They are fixed into the system. So again, there are users out there that may not be overly keen on that. Now, you can also see that big black heatsink there at the back there. That is where our CPU is, that we'll discuss later on. But for now, moving slightly away from internal hardware, leaving that till later in the video, we can talk a little bit about the ventilation and functionality of this, because you can see the fan there at the back of the chassis, again going all the way through, and there is ventilation on the base of the systems there underneath both of the drives as well as underneath the controller board. There's also a slight side ventilation panel there, and on the other side another vented panel there, all of those acting as passive ventilation for the active cooling fan there on the rear. However, when you've got 2 drives installed inside this system, I'm still less than convinced about this system and overall ventilation with that front panel on there. To put that into perspective, we put these trays back inside, and we slide that directly in. One tray, we get our other tray, slide it right in there. When this system is going to be in operation, let's line that up properly, not try and rush it like I'm doing there. When you put your drives inside and you replace that panel, I think that's quite a lot of lost ventilation there on the front. Now, if you look here just off camera, you can see this unit here. This is the TS453E. This has removable front-loaded trays, but the point is that when you put those trays inside, you've still got a big ventilation panel here along the top, and you've got vents around each of the drives, which allow that fan, when it's pulling or pushing air through, to travel over the drives and in between everything. Whereas this, there's no airflow at the front of that system. Yes, we've got the vent on the side there, we've got that vent there and the vent on the bottom and the fan, but I'm not wholly convinced about that front. It looks nicer, it looked great on your desk compared to the others, and again, I do like that colour scheme, but I do think in moments of when heat is being generated by a lot of the components that we're going to talk about later on, you're going to want to remove that band, and it doesn't look quite so compelling. Don't worry about all the bits of plastic, that's just because it's brand new and they're all covered in the seals. The chassis itself is very compact for a 2-bay with rounded off edges as well. That actually make it blend quite nicely into most office environments there. I will also highlight, as always, I will love any NAS that has a USB copy button there on the front, because I know it sounds old school, but in a world of autosaves, I like the idea that I can manual if I choose. And it's also worth highlighting, it is USB 3.2 Gen 2 as well, which means a 10 gigabits per second connection there, supporting 1000 megabytes per second external drives. But as well as that along with additional USB ports on the rear mean that it takes advantage of expansions too, like the 2, 4, 8 and 12 bay expansions from QNAP. They either arrive with USB connectivity, again in JBOD or with a hardware RAID on board, or you can take advantage of PCIe external SAS-based expansions in the TL series, which are supported by this device. A huge range of expandability available to it, and with those USB ports providing a lot more support to other devices that I'll talk about later on. Overall, in terms of design, I really like the look of the thing. I'm just slightly concerned about heat generation when it's in operation. Not that I think it won't be able to keep it cool, because I think it will. My concern is that the fan having to ramp things up in order to keep things cool due to the ventilation restriction, potentially, of that. I'm sure they've done the R&D on this. They wouldn't have had a chassis this long without further testing and thermo-analysis, but still, I'm not wholly convinced about that panel there. But that's enough about the design overall. Why don't we go ahead and make our way over to the ports and connections and discuss how this thing can have its external bandwidth capitalized by you. Now, there is a lot to talk about on this device when it comes to external connectivity. I'm kind of in its shadow there a little bit because it's in front of the light. But there is all manner of connectivity there. We've got our rear fan there. Again, that can be adjusted or increased, decreased, or set to automatic. And again, I would definitely leave that as automatic on this device. Let's cut through. We've already talked about the USB. Let's dig a little deeper into that. Alongside support of 1000 meg external drives there and those expansions as discussed, you've also got support of external network adapters. So again, we are talking about USB to 2.5 gigabit Ethernet adapters. Connect, bang, work straight off the bat. You've also got support of 5 GBE to USB adapters. You can add a 5 gigabit Ethernet copper connection to this for as little as between £40 and £60, depending on the brand. You can put multiple of those on to really maximize your bandwidth. Now, again, you might think 2 SAR hard drives, you're never going to saturate that, and you're probably right. But remember those M2s inside as well. So there is internal bandwidth potential that you can really capitalize on thanks to the USB expandability there. On top of that, there is support of wireless dongles as well, support of office peripherals too. There is just a nice wide range of USB devices there that are supported. But on top of that, you can utilize both those and those bog standard boring USB 2 ports. Yeah, really boring. You can use those as a KVM on this device thanks to its support of HDMI. This device has support of both HDMI and QNAP's own HD Station application. What that means is, alongside QTS running there in the background with all of its apps and services and users and tasks and everything happening at once, there is a parallel running HDMI GUI known as Hybrid Desk Station that runs its own individual apps and services, has its own login window, and from there you can install many of QNAP's own applications in there alongside a number of third-party applications on there. You can run the QVR Pro surveillance program that's got 8 cameras on this device via that HDMI output and KVM. You can run a virtual machine as a local computer with a keyboard, mouse and HDMI output there on this device. There's also third-party applications as well, so you've got QNAP's own multimedia apps. But if you go to qnapclub.eu, you can install Plex with an HDMI out and controllable GUI, Kodi, MB, Twonky, the works, and there's many apps on the QNAP Club that are supported by that HDMI output there for you to install unofficially. However, why have I brought up unofficial applications? Well, because QNAP really, at least at the time of recording, have really taken their foot off the gas as far as the HDMI app on their platform is. It's good, but it hasn't seen anywhere near the number of updates that a number of other HDMI output, a number of applications within QTS, QMaggie, Hybrid Desk Station, Virtual Machine Manager, all of these tools have seen regular updates and big feature improvements as well. Whereas HD Station gets very little in the way of updates. Not many features have been added to it in the last 2.5 years, and we're seeing more activity on the homebrew scene than we are seeing on the official scene for taking advantage of that HDMI output there. And then as soon as QNAP roll out even smaller updates, it can and make the homebrew apps non-workable. They're leading to people that are already doing it for free having to spend time which they may not have to update those apps. Consequently, we have a bunch of useless apps that are no longer supported by small incremental updates to HD Station, and the brand themselves not really doing enough with the great position they hold in the market with that KVM HDMI output, only really rivaled by the likes of Acer Store, and even then there's a big disparity with the quality level of the HDMI output. Now, I mentioned quality of HDMI output because, as mentioned earlier on, this 2-bay taking longer to arrive than the 6 and the 4-bay has resulted in that HDMI being HDMI 2.1. HDMI 2.1 has enormous advantages over HDMI 2.0, available on most other devices right now. HDMI 2.1 has variable refresh rates, audio enhancement improvements there, a tremendous increase on bandwidth, so it's going from, I believe, 18 gigabits to more than 3 times that on HDMI 2.1. 4K, rather than being played at 60 Hz, can go up to 240 Hz. It opens the door to 8K multimedia output. But again, a lot of that is reliant on the software inside to take advantage of this enhanced bandwidth and output things sufficiently or smoothly enough with the applications and services to the HDMI 2.1. So you've got the hardware there, we're just sort of waiting for the software to catch up a little bit, you know. So moving away from that, we can talk about network connectivity. Now, in terms of network connectivity, we're down here, boom, we've got two 2.5 gigabit Ethernet ports there by default. So again, most NASs at this price point, again, factoring in the 8 gig memory, of course, arrive with either 1 GBE or one 2.5 GBE. This has got 2 of them there, which means you are talking up to 5 GBE. Each one of those can give you between 250 and 270 megabytes per second, and put them together, you've got more than 550 or so, 550 megs output on the default connections there. Again, you're going to need a 2.5G switch or router to take advantage of that, or you can go ahead, as mentioned, get yourself a $20 USB to 2.5 GB adapter, connect that in your PC or Mac system, boom, you can direct interface 250 meg, or again, do the same thing with 5G adapters at either end. So again, there's lots of ways to maximize your network. Yes, there'll be users that say, make the jump to 10 GBE, 2.5G is a fad. It's been around a lot, and a lot of ISPs are producing Wi-Fi 6 routers for free, or included in their subscription, that have 2.5 GBE client hardware, 2.5 GBE. It's not as much of a fad as you think. And definitely when 2.5 GBE arrives at the same price as 1 GBE, then it becomes significantly more palatable than spending a bit more and going towards 10 GBE if you're not 100% certain you're going to take advantage of it. But maybe you want to, because this device also has a PCIe Gen 3x2 slot, 2000 megabytes per second to be precise, PCIe bandwidth there that can be taken advantage of to attach 10 GBE cards, dual port 10 GBE cards. You can put in greater than 10 GBE cards. You can go for combo cards like the QM2 series that allow you to install M2 NVMEs inside, as well as installing that, having the 10 GBE output on that shared bandwidth. You've still only got 2000 megs between the card and the system due to limitations of PCI and chipset with this particular CPU and combination build, but having 2.5 GBE and the M2 NVMe slots inside, and then the option to scale up even further via PCIe with Wi-Fi 6 cards and other interface cards being rolled out. There's a lot you can do with the scalability of this device in terms of those ports and connections, whether you're going to take advantage of all of these on day one or scale up later on. And I really think this is one of the most scalable and upgradable 2-bay NASs on the market right now, particularly when you compare it, as mentioned earlier on, with the Synology there. The Synology, and again, we'll do a full comparison soon. This device has got 2 Ethernet ports, but they're both 1 GBE. The USB has been removed from the rear. It's only got 1 USB on the front, and that's a 5 gigabit connection there. And even the network upgrade slot that we're all really chuffed is included in the 723 is a proprietary upgrade module that requires you to utilize their own network upgrade in the E10G22T1 Mini. I seriously hate the name of this thing. It's great, it's modular, it installs really easily, but it is proprietary and it is most certainly more expensive than an off-brand one-port 10GB card. With this thing now changing hands for more than $150, and you can pick up a lot of 10G cards now for sub $100. So again, a lot of network connectivity and upgradability on this device, and not even just 10GB, but lots of other options too. So in terms of ports and connections, it really is a great range on offer there. I just wish in some cases, like with the HDMI, the software could maybe catch up a little bit. But that's enough to do with the ports and connections. What I think I need to do now is grab my handy little screwdriver and make my way inside, because I'd like to discuss the internal hardware. Okay, so accessing the inside of this device is just two screws there on the rear. We slide the side of the case off. It's that black plastic matte chassis there. Pop that on one side. And there we go. We can see the inside of that metal storage cage. So again, plastic on the outside, aluminium there on the middle. This also allows us to get a better view of those memory modules there in the middle that we'll talk about in a moment. But for now, what we can do when we look inside, ventilation is pretty good. I will say, again, a large amount of ventilation is available there at the top, where our PCIe upgrade slot that we've just talked about is there at the top of the device. And again, lots of ventilation there underneath the main fan. So there's quite a lot for the air to flow around there. Still, there's a lot of hardware on that main controller board there. And of course, the first thing we need to talk about is that black heatsink there. That is where our CPU lives. Now, back when the 4 and the 6-bay were launched, it was one of the first devices to take advantage of the Intel Celeron N5105 processor there. That was after a period of adjustment by Intel after the pandemic, running 3 different Intel Celeron processors in the N5105, N5095 and N5095A. I'm available for parties at short notice, by the way. They finally kind of calmed things down. Intel have really stripped things down and got things back to normal post-pandemic, with the N5105 being the premium CPU that's risen to the top. Now, the CPU inside there is a quad-core 2.0 GHz processor there that can burst up to 2.7 GHz when needed on the quad cores. It's 4-thread too. And that CPU also has great integrated graphics as well, which means 4K transcoding. It means handling and management of HEVC-RH.264 transcoding and conversions on the client side there. Also, that CPU has a great little floating point there to multitask. Now, that CPU also opened the doors to most of the other hardware available inside this system. But it's worth bearing in mind with that Celeron and its available PCI lanes that how it's spread that out has changed somewhat. Much like I mentioned with the PCI upgrade slot here being Gen 3x2, that is because of the sheer available range of lanes that this system can handle at any given time because of that chipset. They could have upgraded it and gone towards a Pentium and something bigger with a few more lanes to play with, but then the price would have gone up as well. Now, let's talk about it. Then memory modules. Those memory modules that properly wind me up, because I'm quite pleased there's 8 gig, and I know it's not technically QNAP's fault. They didn't cause the memory shortages. Things like climate change, like droughts in Taiwan, like the pandemic's effect on the changing in workflow patterns, the availability of Xeon around the world, the availability of semiconductors around the world. There are many factors which have caused these hardware shortages, and I know it's not QNAP's fault. However, giving me 8 gig that I'm now going to have to pay a little bit more for, and not giving me the option to scale up, seems to be, on the one hand, an interesting middle ground for a lot of users, but I do know they're probably going to annoy more users than they are going to appease. A lot of users aren't going to use 8 gig. A lot of users are not going to like paying extra for that 8 gig, and there are users that if you are looking into VMs, are looking into cameras, are looking into deploying multiple instances of containers, Linux Station, whatever, that 8 gig is going to get eaten up moderately quickly there. And that's why when we do videos on this channel about scaling up the memory, a lot of QNAP NASs, they go straight to the 16 or going straight to bunging in some great subparental crucial memory to scale up that performance with some good memory. It's 2666 megahertz memory too. and that's on the 4 and the 6 bay, which has removable memory modules. So it's like, I understand why they've done this, I do, but I don't have to like it, you know. And the next thing I want to talk about is the M2 NVMe slots there. And again, if you've watched my other videos recently, you'll know the things that I like about the M2 slots there. There's one up the top and another one along the bottom there, because the options available to you for M2 NVMe's on the QNAP platform are probably better than any other brand. So you got your caching, that was going to be a given, right? That was going to be write caching, where data that's being sent to the NAS gets written to the SSD first, and then the system passes it to the hard drives, thereby improving the response of write and upload to the device. Read caching there, when data is more frequently accessed by the system, it then makes copies onto the areas of SSD, and then moving forward, when that data is needed, and we are talking much smaller I/O data, you won't really feel it with big chunky sequential. Then that data is therefore accessible a lot easier, and it's more felt in terms of responsiveness and a lowering of latency than it is to do meaningful file transmission improvements. But on top of that, you can create storage pools. Now, that's something that these guys, and again, fair play, this is a really, really good product, but they've only just started rolling out storage pools, and at the time of recording, it's only available on 2 of their NAS systems. Whereas QNAP have been doing SSD storage pools for years now. So you can run SSD storage pools on those bays, or use them for caching, or one for a caching, one for a storage pool, and you've still got 2 bays of hard drive storage to take advantage of. That's lovely stuff there. There's also support of Q-tier, QNAP's own tiering system that works with this, where it combines the hard drives and the SSDs into a giant storage area, and then, like caching, it notices which files are being the most frequently accessed, but then it moves, not copies, moves that data to the SSDs. So you can feel the benefits in larger, chunky, sequential data. Not always, but you can set the I/O level during the initialization of Qt. And I should really make a dedicated Qt video soon. I might just do that. So there are lots of things you can do with those M2s as far as QNAP are concerned, but on top of that, you can also use things like AI enhancement. So if you use Google's TPU card, little $20, $30 upgrade there that you slot in via one of the M2 slots, remember, you're only using up one, it allows you to enhance AI processes, so AI photo and thing recognition, the AI surveillance application services that can be bolted and rolled in to your QVR Pro setup with the 8 camera licenses included. You can put in $20, $30 AI enhancement for the TPU there and get enhanced neuro programming happening with your AI support. And again, it's just not available to that breadth on any other NAS platform right now as it is on these guys and their M2 slots, but it's not perfect. As mentioned, because of the spreading thin of the PCI lanes to have this much enabled hardware across the whole system, the result is those M2s are limited. They're PCIe Gen 3 times 1 each. So that's 1,000 megabytes per second bandwidth for each of those slots. Now, that is going to mean that those slots are now being cut down to 1,000 megs when the drives you were putting inside might have been able to crank out to 3 and a bit thousand megs, which is really annoying. But I'm kind of going to give them the tiniest benefit of the doubt because they've spread the architecture of that CPU and what it can do so much to allow those M2s, and a PCIe slot, and the 2.5, and the USB, and the HDMI 2.1. There's just a lot of internal hardware inside, and although I still have my slight reservations about passive and active airflow inside this chassis with so much hardware inside a comparatively small device, I've got to agree that the hardware inside is still very, very good for such a compact 2-bay NAS device, and definitely one of the most premium 2-bays out there, hence why it made the cut in my best 2-bays of the year alongside the Locker Store 2 Gen 2, the DS720, because at that point the 723 hadn't been released, and of course the TerraMaster F2423. And above all of those, it's probably some of the best kind of adaptable and upgradable hardware on the market there. But that's enough about hardware. Let's talk about software running on this device. Let's get this with some drives installed, boot up QTS, and take a good long look at how QTS runs on this NAS. Okay, so here we are on the desktop of the TS-264. Now, as we're about to go through the software, it is worth highlighting this is going to be kind of a quick skip and a jump through the whole software platform there. We're not going to go into tremendous detail, but if you want to learn more about QTS5, I've done a full QTS5 review here. It's like an hour long and covers everything. If you want to know the difference between QTS and QUTS, the ZFS platform, then you can take advantage of my video here where I've compared those. Again, that's about 30-40 minutes long. And finally, if you want to look at the surveillance platform that we're going to talk about later on, I've done an overview of the full thing there. So although in this video I am going to go through some of the highlights and the lowlights, dare I say, of the software on the TS-264, it's worth highlighting. I go into extensively more detail in those videos. Alternatively, there is a full QTS5 review over on the blog here, scrolling down there on screen, going through all of the features and services, and I'm going to be doing some comparative pieces coming up very, very soon. But this is the GUI. You access it while I move the laptop slightly further away. Via your web browser, there is a multitude of client applications you can use. Again, you set up your password that you want to go with there. I have enabled, as you can see there, the admin account. You can see it at the top, but by default, the admin account is normally disabled by default. I've activated it because I'm doing certain other videos in the background that require SSH and some command line stuff. Now, from here, you can pretty much see everything. You can go and install applications as you see fit in the App Center. Lots to choose from there. I've already installed a bunch of them. On top of that, you can take advantage of your user account settings here at the top. And in terms of security, because that's obviously going to be an enormous buzzword for many, when you do create an account, you can enable things like OTP or two-step authentication. You can go ahead if you choose to enable kind of randomized passwords there, rotational passwords if you choose. And if you go into the control panel, you can go ahead into the user account area and from there kind of oversee the creation of multiple accounts. And again, you can create them in batches if you choose, or a single user. A single user, again, you can set the restrictions of a password. Again, that whole rotational password thing, access privileges and more. And it's also worth highlighting that everything I'm showing you right now can be done without internet access. Everything has been disconnected. It can be network only. You will need internet access if you want to install further applications, but you can choose, if you wish, to use your web browser like I'm doing here. Head over to QNAP and download the apps manually. Then tap into your NAS via the local area network and install the apps that way. You don't need to have internet access, and it's there if you want it. And of course, if you do want to access your NAS and you do want to use remote access, then I recommend using third-party applications such as Tailscale and others, or going into QNAP's own remote access, known along the name of My QNAP Cloud, where access is handled bouncing through a QNAP server to you. But again, this does still require an element of opening ports safely or at least securely on your NAS system to do it. So if you don't know what you're doing, don't play around with these, because that was kind of the whole point of the majority of ransomware attacks over the last few years, when people have been enabling access to their NASs while not remaining on top of security updates on their systems. And if you're not going to commit yourself to doing that, then I don't recommend creating any kind of remote level access. But bear in mind, you can set up VPNs, you can go into the security counselor if you choose, and from the security counselor, I believe I put it on the next page, from there, you can go ahead and enable lots of different settings and precautions. As you can see here, we've enabled our firewall there. We've enabled malware removal tools there. We've enabled the antivirus on file checks and the security checkup, which when you set it up for the first time, you can kind of change its level of depth and security that it's doing. So you can run a scan at any time if you choose to. And as you can see from here, although most of my precautions are pretty tight, I have enabled, I haven't downloaded the latest version of License Center because that only arrived today. And secondly, I've enabled QTS to install third-party applications without a signature. By default, that will be turned off, but I've turned it on for a reason I'll talk about in just a moment. But you do have quite a barrage of different tools here that can analyze your system in real time or check the system up to a point. On top of that, you can change the severity of those scans being done by the system quite easily. So again, you can go for a basic, intermediate, advanced, or customize it so certain preset areas of your system security are heightened or decreased as per your own storage needs for you and your other users there. Now, When you are connected to the system over a network, you can go into the network and virtual switch manager here, and this is where you can micromanage the connectivity of your system in the local area environment and those ports and connections. So as you can see, this NAS has 2 Ethernet ports there. I'm taking advantage of one 2.5 GB port, but I've also created a virtual switch as well. And in the virtual switch, that is because I set up virtual machine utilization on this, hence where that virtual switch will come in useful. But from here, you can adapt a lot of those connections, change access rules, priority, stuff like that. It's all quite malleable and changeable within that system setting there. Now, in the App Center, as mentioned, I've installed a lot of apps then. I'm not going to go into too much detail because once again, you could so easily just go into my full review there, or you can go ahead and look into the QUTS versus QTS review or read that article. But what I will say is the range of applications and services available at the beginning is pretty good. There are some glaring first-party omissions that Synology users will be very familiar with and sad to not see there. There isn't really a wholesale equivalent of Synology's active backup application. There's lots of bits of it found in other applications. So if we're going to backup and sync, for example, we've got hybrid mount, which bolts on cloud and bucket level storage from the cloud onto your NAS. If you're a Synology user, that's comparable to hybrid share. Then you've got hybrid backup sync 3, which is a multi-tier backup solution tool, allowing you to back up to USB, to other NASs, to cloud, to all manner of ways, and I'll go through that in a moment. But then you've got things such as QSync, which allows you to pin on your local system. If you go access your folders here, you can create a synchronized folder here, which you can then synchronize with the NAS and access the NAS in a local way using your own file browser there. And you can choose, if you wish, as you go through them, to pin certain files, to stream certain files very easily. So for example, you can right click and scroll along into different options where you can choose, if you wish, to pin that file permanently, stream a 30-day data streamed file, or just see the architecture of your NAS without it taking up any room on your network attached storage device and on your local PC or Mac system, but just having empty shadow files to browse through and then choosing when you wish to make them accessible locally. All of that within your native file manager there. We've got things like the Mars application there, with the Mars application that allows you, if we open it up, to connect. And it is early days for this application, I'll be straight with you, but it allows you to bolt on SaaS kind of home consumer services like WordPress and Google Photos, if you're running a blog and stuff, and synchronize the data on those platforms to your local NAS. So in my case, you can connect things like your entire Google Photos account, connect to it there, and then synchronize and back up your entire Google Photos library onto the NAS. But bear in mind at this time of recording, you can't download the JSON files, that's the metadata, to the NAS without doing a complex service using Google Takeaway. So again, it's still not perfect there yet. Moving away from that, you can do things like bolting on cloud storage and make cloud storage accessible and synchronize with the NAS. On top of that, you've got things like hyperdata if you want to back up kind of much larger scale data with your system. That's when we're talking buckets and online VMware and stuff like that, and synchronize it with your system. And then you've got BoxSafe, which allows you to synchronize with Office 365 and Google Workspace, and therefore synchronize all of that account data, synchronize all of that native kind of third-party SaaS platform with your NAS to act as an on-premises hardware client with those cloud services, so that when all of your users in your home or office environment, even remotely, are working on that data supplied on that third-party software platform, if the internet connection is severed in your office, everyone can still access that data natively on their machine because it's going via the NAS where it was all backed up. And then as they make changes, it is synchronized with the NAS, and when the internet is re-established, it then synchronizes with that cloud and updates all of those records there. So there's lots to play with. Now, when it comes to multimedia, you've got quite a lot of applications here. You've got things like PhotoStation, you've got things like QMaggie. So PhotoStation is more of a traditional file management tool. It's got lots of settings there that photo sharing sites. So if you're a novice or even an amateur photographer that wants to share a lot of their multimedia, you can do that there, and there's lots of ways in which you can break down into them. Again, I won't go into loads of detail, but you can go into the overview and review to give you more information about how this works. Now, on top of that, you've got their AI photo recognition tool known as QNAP. QNAP allows, with the power of an AI, to recognize things, people, faces. So for example, we can go into our album area here, and then from there we can see a collection of people recognized by their face. We can give them a name, so in this case that is me. Then boom, it'll recognize all those photos of me from now on. If ever I look slightly different in a photo, let's scroll down, photo of me that they're wearing shades. I can merge that into an existing record, and boom, all of those put together. And from that point, when I upload new photos, they'll go into that catalog. But it goes one better, as you identify different people, and therefore you can use this to analyze decades of photos that you're uploading to the NAS. And remember, you're not using the internet while you're doing this. You can go ahead and use thing and subject recognition, which allows it to recognize certain things. So for example, identifying different subjects are all done, and it recognizes, for example, sports. And these break down as well into subcategories. So for example, if you wanted to go for food and drink, let's have a look. Whenever I've got one for food and drink, select food. It breaks it down into different kinds of food. All of these from simple 5 albums that I have updated here. It allows you to break down into them and learn more about what we're seeing here. So again, QNAP, there's lots more to it in terms of photo sharing, rules and regulations with that. But again, we're just skimming over the surface of these applications here, and there's a lot more to them, which is why I recommend checking out that review from earlier. Now, alongside that, you've got simple file folder management there. So with file folder management, you can go ahead and just break down into it, accessible purely via the browser if you choose, or there's client applications for your PC or Mac system. And again, you can share, you can archive, you can extract, you can do all of the stuff you'd expect like a normal file browser, all from directly in the user interface to the NAS. Now, carrying on the subject of multimedia again, we talked about photos. What about video? What about music? Well, if we go in, we have Music Station, which could arguably have had a little bit more work in the preceding years. QNAP have not really done a great deal with it over the years, but it does still allow you to play music within your NAS, as well as stream directly onto connected network systems like Sonos's or other DLNA media systems, and send music directly to those if they're supported on the network. And there's a lot more you can do on that app too. On top of that, there is Video Station, which is all right. I'm not the biggest fan of Video Station personally. I think Video Station could still do with a large upheaval. It does allow file folder breadcrumb access. You can kind of crawl metadata utilizing a plugin in the App Center. But ultimately, as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to multimedia on a QNAP, and particularly video multimedia, I'm always going to recommend Plex Media Server. And Plex Media Server runs great on the TS-264 there. And again, we've dumped on some images here, some videos even. And dare I say it, when it comes to the TS-264, when we do our Plex Media Server test, it should do very, very well indeed. Because as you can see, it's got everything on there. It's doing the scraping and metadata. It's running fine. And if you're accessing this via a client device like a laptop, a tablet, a Fire Stick, whatever, or even a home console, you'll be able to stream all that media lovely with 4K transcoding support in HEVC thanks to that Intel Celeron processor. Now, Plex Media Server being a third-party application, what about the rest of third-party apps? Well, not only is there the official third-party apps, but as mentioned earlier on in the video, you can disable if you choose to. And remember, it is a risky gambit because you are now installing stuff in your system that might not be ideal. You can disable digital certificates and use homebrew and third-party app centers like the QNAP Club, which is a community-supported database of applications, and then it will crawl this database for loads of other apps. These can include Kodi, these can include Plex Media Server via HDMI out, these can include computer games, these can databases, other cloud storage providers. But bear in mind that you can't access this without the internet. So unfortunately, unless you're going to add the internet, you're not going to be able to access those services. Now, what about the other features and functions of this device? Well, in the storage manager, for example, within that we can do quite a lot of things. From there, we've obviously created our RAID with our 2 drives here inside this system. So we've got our 2 drives right now going to the storage and snapshot area. Now, as we go in, we've created our RAID, and we can find out more information about the health of the RAID, the health of the drives, any kind of issues, and what is running from those drives quite easily. But on top of that, we can make our way into the disks area of this device and not only manage our drives individually, and again check their health. If you've got Seagate Ironwolf, you can go ahead and run those tests and checks if you choose. Find out more disk information if you like. There's just lots to play with there, and you can even assess and monitor the whole RAID group if you choose. There's lots of other features and options here that I could talk about in this video, but I'm going to hold back. But just remember that by default, a lot of things like snapshot retentions are ticked as enabled when you're setting the device up, as well as when you're creating RAID groups. It will prioritize RAID groups that have got redundancy at their core, rather than things like RAID 0, which give you performance but no safety net. And the same goes for these M2 NVMe slots that are inside. As mentioned, there's 2 M2 NVMe slots, and if you choose, you can go ahead and make those into storage pools, caching, Q-tier, use those slots for AI upgrades in the TPU. There's loads you can do there on those. And I know I'm being repetitious and talking very fast because a lot of you on the channel have heard me talk about this, but although the apps sometimes feel that they could use a little bit more time in the oven, or that the OS itself is a little inconsistent with some of the design choices and the fonts between different tools, and finally that it doesn't feel quite as responsive as Synology's platform or quite as user-friendly as Synology's platform, they have made great strides in the last year, I've got to say. And things like the surveillance application that will add 8 camera licenses to your system, going for it on this device. And on top of that, with those 8 camera licenses, you can go ahead and take advantage of AI supported services like QVR Face Tiger as well. There's a lot that you can be getting on with, and there's a lot for this system to do there for you with a lot of other surveillance applications, including, if you choose, adding a USB camera to your NAS if you like. And this allows you to have a local camera connected to your NAS. So for example, let's go ahead and add a camera. I've connected a USB camera already. We've got the support with the different resolutions if we choose. We can go ahead and click OK. And this makes a USB camera on the device now completely accessible. And you can add that camera if you choose to your range of cameras within QVR Pro. So you're not just limited to IP cameras like the ones I keep here in the studio. So there's lots to play with there. When it comes to virtualization, there's a few decent little options for you to be playing with, notwithstanding things like containers, because there is a container station application in the form of container station from QNAP that allows you to create little virtual buckets to create your little virtual field, your little sandbox environments there. Very easy to use. There's a whole registry for you to utilize there. There's also Ubuntu Station, which will allow you to install an Ubuntu VM on the NAS, directly accessible within 3 clicks, and allow you with that Linux tool to run your very own Linux VM from within the NAS. Finally, you've got things like QNAP's own virtualization station, which will allow you to not only run virtual machines of a multitude of different OSs from in the system, as well as support migration and conversion of existing VMs that aren't in the right format, but you can go ahead, if you choose, to go ahead and just 3-click download the latest versions of Windows as VMs. Alternatively, go to the VM Marketplace, where there's some more select virtual machine environments that you can go with there. There's a tremendous amount of support, and I haven't even talked about the HDMI output on this device, which, as we've discussed earlier in the video and probably towards the conclusion, I wish QNAP did more with this feature, but at least it's there, and that's another one of those features that the QNAP Club does a very good job of supporting. But I'm going to wrap things up. There are lots of applications and services you can play with there, lots of stuff for you to do with this NAS, and with a severe tightening, I would say, and a lot of their security and management within those applications, hopefully we won't see anything like Deadbolt happen again. But still, nonetheless, if you are looking at this NAS, do bear in mind you're still talking about a 2-bay NAS system. Although that's got that 8GB of memory and a quad-core Intel CPU, right now I am running a number of these big applications at the same time. So if we go into the resource monitor, just remember that QNAP's platform isn't quite as efficient with its hardware as some of the other devices in the market. And right now, even with a lot of these apps in idle, I'm still getting close to half of that memory being used. You're not going to use as many apps as me, but just bear in mind that the kind of smart caching in the background could serve to be a little bit more tweaked, something we hopefully will see in later versions of QTS. But let's wrap things up, make our way back into the studio, and decide what we think of the QNAP TS-264. So what do I think? Well, straight away, as 2 bays go, it absolutely rates high for me. I think the amount of hardware you're getting inside this easily puts it, if not in the top 5, then potentially in the top 3 best 2-bay NASs I've ever featured here on the channel. That said, do bear in mind, it does come at quite a hefty little price tag there. And again, knocking around in your own currency, somewhere between 450 and 500 or so, you are paying extra for such a premium 2-bay in the market. Now, other things I like about this device is just the sheer scale of hardware that's being included in such a frankly tiny box here. Again, we mentioned HDMI 2.1, we've mentioned there 2.5 GBE, a couple of ports, M2 NVMe upgradability, the PCIe upgradability, 10 gigabits per second, USB connectivity there, and just the whole thing, along with 8 gig of DDR4 memory default, meaning that there is just not a great deal that this isn't going to be able to do that the brands themselves promise. Then you've got that broader degree of support of what those M2 NVMe slots inside can do, does effectively make this 2-bay NAS into a functional 4-bay as far as I'm concerned, with all the different features and functionality, and not including the AI's upgradability of using the Google TPU. Then you've got the fact that QNAP as a brand still continues to have one of the broadest supports of third-party hardware in the market, when a lot of brands are being ever so slightly controlling about first and third-party support on their platforms. QNAP still continues to keep their platform as third-party supported as possible. Sometimes I would say to their detriment, and often when you use their software, trying to be so open-ended and customizable does kind of count against them sometimes, with their system getting a little bit confused sometimes. When you try to do too many things at once, it can then go, oh my god, there's too much going on. So do bear that in mind when you are utilizing it. Also, I'm a fan of the design. I'm still not bowled over by the ventilation, and again, maybe time will tell, but I do like the look of the thing. I do like the scale of the thing, and I think given that this may exist in your home or business environment and its sheer size, as long as you're not going to be utilizing enterprise or Pro Series drives or utilizing any drives above 10 TBE, you're going to be able to deploy this pretty much anywhere with a very small footprint. We mentioned earlier on, several times in fact, about how this sits against the other premium 2-bay of 2023, the Synology DS-723, and I know a lot of users are going to be very keen to immediately highlight the disparities between that quad-core Intel Celeron and the the AMD embedded Ryzen inside the Synology, and we're not going to lean too heavy on that, to be honest, simply because they're different CPUs with a different end goal in mind, with this one clearly being a lot more business and this one being somewhere between business and pleasure between the two of them. But there's still no denying that there is tremendous usability but rigidity within the Synology platform, and on the QNAP platform there, a great more open-ended nature, but with an element of trial or fail or a learning curve that's just that little pinch higher there overall. It is a good system as far as I'm concerned, but again, there are things about it that are just not going to bowl me over. First and foremost, that 8 gig of memory. Once again, it's not QNAP's fault. I get it. Memory shortages, I understand, but still, having the 8 gig of memory inside this soldered to the board, that is a conscious decision, and I'm not overly keen on the inability to scale up that memory, and the fact that I've got to pay for 8 gig on day dot, and what I'd rather have is pay for 4 and have the option to scale up later on. On top of that, the NVMe's being 3 times 1 each, I know it's a system consequence of living within this architecture, but still there are those of you that are going to buy much faster SSDs from WD and Seagate to install inside this, and be slightly put out that they're going to be capped to 1000 megs. And the HDMI 2.1 port on there, as mentioned, I'm really pleased that it's there. I'm really pleased that I can take advantage of incredible 4K output. I just wish that HD Station saw the updates that it should to take it over the line and take advantage of that 2.1 HDMI output there and the enhanced bandwidth that it affords. And finally, QNAP is still going to continue, at least I reckon for at least another year or so, to carry that weight of the fact they were targeted by ransomware right at the start of 2022. It's unavoidable, it has to be discussed, and I think they are going to have to take their lumps on that for a while longer for a lot of users. They have enhanced QTS in numerous ways. They've enhanced the encryption security. They have enhanced a lot of the defaults to be a great deal more closed, and a lot of features and services now are pretty much uninstallable without certain security measures in place. They've also included a lot clearer rules with regards to different settings that you change on the system and the impact they can have on the security of the system, and a lot of the usability of the platform has been improved when it comes to user controls towards security and access, and not just allowing users like they did a couple of years ago to just start punching holes in their router and thereby letting open doors to some of the applications. They've really tightened things in, but I do think they're still going to, as a brand, have to take their lumps just a little bit longer there before people start to get a little kinder about these things. But overall, if you're looking for a powerhouse 2-bay, easily top 3, top 5 right now. And although it's more expensive than a lot of other 2-bays in the market right now, you are getting a tremendously scalable system that, arguably more in terms of hardware than software, is going to tick a lot of boxes for a lot of you out there. But this has been my review of the QNAP TS-264 2-bay right now at the start of 2023. Of course, we're going to be comparing it against numerous other NASs in the coming weeks, and we're going to be doing a few other dedicated things with this device, from performance tests to Plex and more. So do stay tuned for that. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, click like. It really helps us out. Ever since YouTube basically knackered the dislike button, it really helps us know what we're doing right and wrong. Secondly, if you want to learn more and get more coverage on this device, we've done numerous videos on the 4 and 6-bay version of this in the last 8 or 9 months, but you can hold out for more content coming out on this soon, both on the written blog and here on YouTube. If you need help choosing the right network or storage solution for you, or you're still kind of lost in the woods a little bit, use the free advice section over on NAS Compares. It is the big blue button on the right hand side of the page at NC. Click that button, enter your details, we'll get back to you and help you with your query there as best we can, me and Eddie. Alternatively, the free community forum at Ask NAS Compares, manned by me, Eddie, who does more work on there than me, I'll be straight with you, and other community NAS members to help you out with your questions. And finally, if you were going to shop to Amazon anyway, and if this video has helped you, make sure those two things are true. Use the links in the description to take you to Amazon. Not only will it result in taking you directly to Amazon, no additional cost to yourself by clicking there, there's no infringed security nonsense, but on top of that, when you get there, anything, and I do mean anything you buy, once you get to Amazon from that link, we get a kickback, and that allows us, me and Eddie, the only people here at NAS Compares, to continue doing what we do, making more videos, writing more articles, and helping as many people as possible. Thank you so much for watching. Have yourself a great week.